DM burnout is a universal truth. No DM is immune to its damage. This week, I discuss 9 tips specifically for Dungeon Masters on how to avoid getting bitten by the Burnout Bug. Hello players and GMs, I am Reese, and welcome to another video by Jetpack7. Before we get started, I just want to ask everyone to take a quick moment to hit the subscribe button. I know every single YouTuber asks this, but that's because it really does make a huge difference for the channel. It gives me a lot of encouragement from a personal standpoint to see that people support the channel enough to actually do that, but it also helps us navigate the YouTube algorithm that is growing more and more complex by the day. The one thing that hasn't changed is that the number of subscribers a channel has directly affects the visibility of the videos. So if you want to help me out, that is absolutely the best possible way to do it, and I would appreciate it so dang much. This week, I wanted to talk to all of the DMs out there who, like me, play a lot of D&D. There were points in my life when I was playing upwards of 3 games a week and DMing another game on top of that. It was absolute madness and definitely resulted in some serious D&D burnout. It was just way too much. And over time, I've gotten much better at managing that feeling of burnout, but once it's there, it's pretty dang hard to get rid of. So I have found that the best way to manage DM burnout is to be proactive and take steps to prevent yourself from feeling it at all. And that is what I'm going to talk about this week. 9 steps you can take to keep your games of D&D fresh and you, the DM, excited to run them. So let's go ahead and get into it. The first tip is a pretty obvious one, but one that can actually be more difficult if your playgroup is particularly active. Play less frequently. And I don't just mean DM less frequently, I mean play D&D less frequently as a player or as a DM. Just cut down on the amount of D&D in your life. Now obviously, if you don't want to do this and you don't feel as though the amount of D&D you're playing is contributing to any burnout, then this tip may not be necessary for you. But I've found that in periods when I'm playing a lot and DMing even a little bit, I've just played so much D&D that I'm not as excited to run the games as I would normally be. My downtime gets so saturated with D&D that it kind of becomes all I think about, either from a player perspective or a DM perspective, and that ends up bogging me down quite a bit. I have found that the easiest way to prevent that from happening is to just be a bit more selective of which campaigns I am playing in and which campaigns I am DMing. My limit is 2 games a week lately, though that can fluctuate depending on the month, but 2 a week has been a pretty consistent amount of D&D that doesn't wear me out, but still allows me to scratch the DM and the player itch every week. My next tip is in the same vein as the last in regards to overexposing yourself to D&D. Play shorter sessions. I can't stress this enough, the human attention span can only last so long, and when you've been in a game for 4 hours or more, things start to get chaotic, to say the least. Not to mention the fact that you're usually playing at night, so by the time that many hours have passed, it's probably getting pretty late into the evening. Every now and then, of course, it's fine to have a super long session, but I found that most of the time, I actually lean towards having the shortest possible session that still allows me and the players to craft a cohesive story. The way I see it, each session of D&D is like a chapter in a book. I like each session to have a solid beginning, middle, and end, and so really the amount of time I need to do that is anywhere between 2.5 to 3 hours max. That's it. Any more than that and you risk just getting tired, losing focus, the players may start losing interest, things just start to drag on and it isn't as great of an experience. I love D&D, but I don't want to spend an extra hour or 2 in an unfocused, unorganized, unproductive mess. And allowing yourself to consistently fall into those super long sessions can cause some serious burnout from my experience. As you all probably know, much of a DM's job actually takes place outside of the session in preparation, which is the subject of my third tip, don't over-prepare. The reasons for this are twofold. First of all, it just takes too much time. Prepping is already tiring and time-consuming and can be a pretty big cause of DM burnout even without spending way too much time doing it. I have found myself preparing so many things in a campaign that the players would never in a million years investigate, but I felt the need to put a bunch of time and effort into it just in case they did run into it. Instead of just relying on my improv to carry me through the bits and pieces where I needed it, I wanted to try and be prepared for literally every possibility. And without fail, my players found possibilities that I didn't account for, and I used my improv anyway without touching the stuff I prepared. That's how it always will be. Don't try to change it. The second reason is that over-preparing can make the sessions themselves more exhausting for the DM. When you prep stuff, it's generally because you're anticipating that your players get there to whatever it is that you prepped. And as we know, players usually don't go where we expect. So when you've put a bunch of time into prepping stuff and the players start to look like they have no intention of going there, it kind of makes you want to urge the players in one direction or the other, instead of just letting go of the reins and letting your prepared bit fall to the wayside. It can be tough, especially since you're now put in a position where you either let your players do what they want, which is ideal, or you kind of railroad them into doing this thing you spent hours preparing. It's a bit of a lose-lose and can add some unneeded stress to a session. So yeah, just relax, don't spend too many hours preparing, keep things loose and open, and I think you'll have a much easier time running the game. This next tip is a bit of a subcategory for the previous one: use third-party resources. And this isn't just an opportunity for me to shamelessly plug our books like Legendary Dragons, a book with 20 named dragons with amazing backstory, stat blocks, and tips on how to add them into the game, or our book Masters and Minions that has a series of bosses from levels 1 to 20, all with stat blocks, minion stat blocks, tips on how to run them, and put them into your campaign. This is also an opportunity for me to plug things like Kobold Press, a company that has created some of the best third-party 5e content out there, and MCDM Productions, founded by famous D&D YouTuber and writer Matt Colville. In all seriousness though, using third-party content takes a ton of work off your plate. It is so easy to open a book, see a monster with a stat block, a story, and tips on how to run it, and just plug that into your campaign with no further effort. It can take prep off of your plate and gives you a vibrant storytelling opportunity. All of these were written by D&D players who ran into the same problem as you and wanted to help other people solve those problems, so they got super talented writers and artists to create the stuff, and it helps a lot. So don't be afraid to use it. Tip number 5 is pretty straightforward, but is just kind of a tip in real life. But do your prep work over the week instead of just right before the session. I know we're told a million times that procrastinating is bad, but it really is so much easier to prep 15 minutes here or there over the course of the week, and then only have to prep for an hour or so before the session itself. You don't have to eliminate prep time before the session completely, but doing a little bit of it here or there can cut down on time you spend before the session, which can add some time spent playing since you don't feel like you've been doing D&D for quite as long. In other words, what would normally be 4 hours of D&D with 2 hours of prep, so 6 hours total, can now be 4 hours of D&D with half an hour of prep, or 5 hours of D&D with an hour of prep. It's just less time spent preparing for D&D when all we want to do is play, which I think can really help prevent us from becoming burnt out. The next tip is kind of a hard one to discuss because I don't want it to sound like flaking is cool, because it certainly isn't ideal. Either way, my tip is to not be afraid to call off sessions. Now, of course, there is a limit to that. Don't be canceling sessions every week at the very last minute. Anytime I have to cancel a session, I either do it first thing in the morning or at least one day before. I don't always have the luxury of doing that depending on my schedule, because obviously sometimes some things just come up, but generally speaking, I want my friends to have as much time as possible to make other plans or whatever and not be caught off guard by the canceled session. But to be frank, sometimes you just aren't feeling it. And most of the time, I've found that you can get back into the groove as the session progresses, but some days I just can't find the energy or the drive to prepare and run a game. And the hardest thing to do is cancel the session, because then that adds to that feeling of guilt. So talk to your players, apologize for canceling, and then move on and enjoy your night off. Try not to beat yourself up over it too much, because as long as you aren't canceling super often, I guarantee your players aren't really thinking about it as much as you are. If you are canceling sessions super often, then it might be time to analyze how much you actually want to play, or potentially reducing the frequency at which you play, but that's another conversation entirely, so we're moving on. You know, actually that isn't another conversation, so here's another bonus tip. Don't feel pressured to run a game weekly. Having an extra week to relax and prep slowly can be a huge relief and can allow you more time to get ramped up and excited to play. I did that for a while in an online campaign I was running. We played weekly, and then I got a little burnt out with work or whatever, and I made it bi-weekly instead, and suddenly I found myself way more energized for every session because it gave me time to start missing the campaign again. It gave me time to want to prep and run and talk to my friends. So yeah, sometimes bi-weekly is fine, sometimes monthly is fine. Play at the frequency that fits your schedule best. Okay, now on to my actual next tip. Play different systems. 5e is great. I love this system. It is the game that got me into RPGs, it is the game on which this YouTube channel was founded, and all of Jetpack 7's books are based. That said, sometimes I just want to play something different, and for those times I look to different systems. There is only so much variety you can achieve when playing within the same rule set over and over again. D&D is designed to play a certain way, and while you can bounce off the walls and even bend them a little bit, it is difficult to fully break those walls without just moving systems entirely. I look at games like Call of Cthulhu, where rather than playing a heroic adventurer slaying hordes of monsters, you're playing as kind of just a regular person who gets caught in a horror film and is doing everything in their power just to survive. It is a very different gaming experience. I've played Legend of the Five Rings, Star Wars RPGs, Lord of the Rings RPGs, and they've all been super different than 5e, but also very, very fun. So even if it's just a one-shot or a short campaign, playing in a different system can give you that variety you need to hop back into 5e refreshed and ready to be a hero again. Not to mention, there are a few rules from other RPGs that I really liked and ended up adopting in my 5e game, so that's a nice little bonus to experiencing other RPG systems. 2 tips left, and these are pretty dang big ones for me, and ones that I have to keep reminding myself of. First of all, take breaks between campaigns as a DM. Whether that means letting someone else DM so that you can play, or just taking a break from D&D entirely, do whatever you can to let that campaign that you just finished rest a little bit and give yourself some time to unwind. I understand that sometimes the momentum and excitement of finishing a campaign can be the sort of high you want to ride into the next campaign, but that excitement does fade. And there will likely come a time when you wish you had given yourself at least a few weeks to step away for a bit. D&D is amazing, and if you never ever get tired of playing it, more power to you. But I have found that for myself and many people I know, breaks are super duper helpful to give you the opportunity to reset and, like I said before, slowly prep for the next campaign. Great ideas and great preparation take time, and giving yourself that time without an encroaching deadline can be the key to letting your creative juices flow again. And finally, the most important tip of them all, don't put too much pressure on yourself to give your players the perfect D&D experience. This is the one I struggle with the most. Every DM wants their campaign to be the best campaign ever, and that can cause some serious, well, for lack of a better term, performance anxiety. You feel the pressure to perform as a DM, which is super unhealthy for the longevity of your campaign. Let me put it this way. It is not the DM's job to provide the perfect campaign to their players. It is the DM's job to facilitate a gaming experience that their players will enjoy. Sometimes that means sitting back and letting the players do all the work. Other times that means crafting a more railroady narrative campaign. Either way, neither of those options are the perfect campaign because, spoiler alert, the perfect campaign does not exist. Or, alternatively, and this is how I like to look at it, any campaign that the players and the DM are enjoying is the perfect campaign. There's no need for some brilliantly crafted, complex narrative or the most intense combat with the most expensive and detailed minis and battle maps. If you and your friends are having fun together, that is literally all that matters. 100% of it, nothing else. So there is no pressure to perform. You are simply a member of your group of friends who controls all the NPCs. You play a different role than everyone else, but if your players don't feel the need to perform, then you shouldn't either. Just have fun, relax, and remember that the key of the night is to have a good time. Nothing more, nothing less. Alright, those are my 9-ish tips to preventing DM burnout. Let me know in the comments what you all do to keep yourselves from getting burnt out on DMing. If you like this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.